Support comes from the St. Louis Public Library Foundation. During these challenging times, free access to digital resources is a necessity. You can help our community stay connected. Support your St. Louis Public Library at slpl.org.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Owen Ramsingh was born in the Netherlands but moved to the United States when he was just 5 years old. Now in his late 40s, Ramsingh was a longtime resident of Columbia, Missouri. That was until last September when he was detained by Border Patrol and customs agents at Chicago's O'Hare Airport on his way back from a visit to the Netherlands to see his father. Even though he had been renewing his green card and was a legal U.S. resident, Ramsingh was detained because of a cocaine possession charge from his teenage years. I spoke with Addison Zanger, a student reporter and producer for KBIA, our sister station in Columbia, about Owen Ramsingh's story. I first asked her what Ramsingh's life was like in Columbia.
Yeah, so Owen, he lived with his wife and his daughter, Diana Ramsingh. She's been a really prominent voice throughout this whole process. His daughter's in high school. He worked security at the Blue Note and Rose Music Hall, very involved in the community in that way. And talking to him, you know, it seemed like he was a little surprised by his community involvement, especially after seeing all the support when he was in detention, but truly, truly a big part of Columbia.
Mm-hmm. Now, I understand that Ramsingh went to visit his father in the Netherlands in 2025. Had he done that in the past without incident?
Yes, I believe so. He was apart from his father when he moved to the U.S. at 5 years old. And then he had been visiting the Netherlands relatively frequently just to catch up and things like that since they got reconnected.
Mm-hmm. And do you know whether Owen had any concerns about traveling abroad in 2025, especially given what was happening around federal immigration enforcement with the start of President Donald Trump's second term in office?
I'm not sure what his personal thoughts were, but I think, you know, there's a general sort of fear around travel, especially if you are an immigrant at this time.
Do you know what it was that triggered Ramsingh's detention at O'Hare when he was trying to return to the States from the Netherlands?
So on his criminal record, Owen does have a cocaine charge from his teenage years. Talking to him a little bit about it, you know, I think there was a deeper story there that a lot of articles weren't really able to get into previously. You know, he grew up in a little bit of a difficult situation, was trying to put food on the table for his family and saw an opportunity. And he got caught with cocaine when he was 17. He was charged as an adult and served time in a maximum security prison when he was 18. So that was on his criminal record. It was flagged by Customs and Border Patrol agents, and they sort of took it from there.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think it's important to clarify here that Owen Ramsingh, he was in the country legally with a green card that he'd been renewing. And that's worth noting because green card renewal is required every 10 years. Why did a drug charge from so many years ago, and again, this was from when he was a teenager, Owen is now in his 40s, how did this lead to his detention this time?
It is... we've talked to immigration lawyers, and it is a legal thing. They are allowed to flag something like that, and they are allowed to produce consequences based on that. So it was part of the job. I also think he had recently renewed his green card, and that had put it in a little bit of a different situation. But yes, he has been renewing his green card since he came when he was 5.
Yeah, and we should be clear, too, that charge was a nonviolent offense, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And broadly speaking, how is Owen's situation, similar to or different from other detentions that are happening throughout the country?
I think it has been kind of indicative of the conditions of that we're seeing come out of these detention centers. You know, he's spoken about it pretty recently, and just a lot of very difficult and dehumanizing situations, you know, very small quarters, very little food, very little to drink. He had a really hard time communicating with his family. You know, there were times where they literally didn't know where he was, and no one could track him down for them. So I think the circumstances have been hopefully not consistent across the board, but we have been seeing more and more of that in the recent months.
Mm-hmm. And did Owen share anything with you about what's happening to people like him and others in the U.S.?
Yeah, he talked a little bit about some of the work he's doing in the Netherlands, and a big part of that is getting into therapy. You know, he says that it's taken a real toll on his mental health, and he prides himself on being someone who is very tough and very strong, but this is clearly something that has shaken him.
Were there any legal efforts mounted to keep Ramsingh in the United States?
He was in the court system fighting his case. I know that he felt relatively confident in his ability to stay in the U.S. when he was in Texas, but then once he eventually moved to New Mexico, that confidence sort of went away.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk with us about the timeline of when he was arrested? You've mentioned where he was sent, but as far as how long it took for him to be detained and then eventually deported, how much time are we looking at there?
So he was detained in September of 2025 and then eventually deported in February of 2026. So a total, I think that's 4.5, 5 months between two major detention centers and then the small time he did spend in Chicago. Mm-hmm. He was originally in El Paso. It's called the Camp East Montana Detention Center, which has seen a lot of publicity recently for their terrible situations, and it's undergoing new operations and things like that. And then he was moved to New Mexico, eventually signed his own deportation order on December 24th, so on Christmas Eve, was moved back to El Paso that night. And he said he got in at 3 a.m. on Christmas morning, and then he stayed there until he was eventually deported.
Mm-hmm. And did he share anything with you about what that time in detention was like for those, 4.5 to 5 months?
He did. He said, once again, the quarters were very small. He described the food almost as airplane food. It was a really small tray, one meal a day most times, and just a tiny thing of juice for like a kid, mm-hmm. And anytime he said that, this isn't enough to feed a grown man, he was just either ignored or teased for it or anything like that. So very disrespectful environment, very tight quarters, very just a scary situation overall.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that he signed his deportation order. What does that mean? And was there any other option available to him?
I don't know about other options, but he said that the one he did sign said he would be sent out of the U.S. for 8 to 10 years. I assume that was really the only option. I can't imagine he would choose that if there were a possibility to stay in the country with his family, but I don't know that information.
Mm-hmm. Addison, you spoke with Owen about what it was like to leave the United States and then arrive in the Netherlands. And here's what he shared with you about what his first encounters were once he landed.
Oh, yeah. It was very difficult getting through, making it through customs, and speaking with the officer because I didn't have no identification or anything because it was taken by ICE. So I had a temporary passport. It was a 30-day passport that I received, but they wanted to confirm, that I was a Dutch citizen. So they pulled me into a room, talked to me real quick, just to make sure everything was confirmed that I was a citizen here in the Netherlands. And just getting off the plane, I was in shock. I had so much going through my mind, just starting from zero, everything being taken away from me, my family, and just luckily I have my father here, in the Netherlands, and he's a big support system, and he's keeping my head above water.
Addison, what came to mind for you when Owen shared about that experience, as soon as he landed?
I think the first thing I thought, almost hysterically, was about him not having identification to get into the Netherlands. The idea of getting deported, first of all, to a country that someone has deemed your home country, and then to not be identified as that, as belonging there. I can't imagine not only going through that once, but twice. I imagine that was extremely, extremely frustrating.
Mm-hmm. And he was deported to the Netherlands because he is a Dutch citizen?
He was born in the Netherlands, so he lived there until he was 5 years old, and then he eventually immigrated to the States with his mother.
I'm talking with Addison Zanger, a journalist with KBIA in Columbia, Missouri. We're talking about the story of Owen Ramsingh, a longtime Columbia resident who was detained last September and deported to the Netherlands in February. We'll have more in just a moment. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Let's return to my conversation with Addison Zanger, a student reporter and producer with our sister station KBIA in Columbia, Missouri. We're talking about the case of Owen Ramsingh, a longtime Columbia resident who was detained by Border Patrol and Customs agents last September at Chicago's O'Hare Airport. He was returning from a visit to see his father in the Netherlands. Ramsingh, who is now in his late 40s, was detained because of a drug possession charge from when he was a teenager. Addison, tell us a little bit about what is happening with Owen's family. Do you know how they're feeling and how his deportation is affecting them?
He talks about his wife, and there's clearly a lot of love there. He says she's very strong, his daughter's very strong, but they really were ripped away from each other. They have seen each other since he's been back, I think, 2 times, but, his daughter's graduating in May, and he won't be able to be there. There's just so many milestones, so many big moments, holidays, Easter just passed, so many different things that he doesn't get to be a part of, and I imagine that's not easy on his family as well.
Mm-hmm. And graduating from high school, that is a big deal for so many families.
Absolutely. It's such a big moment, and to be a part of that, for him, it was such an unselfish thing. He just said, I want to be there to be able to support her, and, I think that's what any father wants.
Mm-hmm. Owen also told you about what it is taking for him to stay connected with his family. And in particular, he was describing just making sure that he can stay in touch with his wife.
We speak on a daily basis. She actually, with our time frame, 7-hour difference, every break that she gets at her job, we talk with each other. And by the time I'm getting ready to go to sleep, she's just getting off work. So we're able to talk a little bit then. But it's in the 7-hour period. That's all we can speak with each other. But that's super difficult, but we make the best out of it. She's strong, I'm strong, and we just fight this battle together.
Addison, listening to your story, And then to this audio that we've just heard, it really strikes me how Owen sounds. I mean, he came to the U.S. when he was 5, as you noted, and he's in his 40s now, and you can hear that. Like, there's no mistaking that he is from the United States. Many people in the Netherlands, of course, they do speak some English, including Owen's father, but Owen is needing to learn Dutch in order to conduct everyday business, like reading street signs, and that's what he needs in order to get a driver's license and to navigate the roadways safely. What did Owen tell you about the challenges that he's facing around languages or culture?
I mean, absolutely, kind of reiterating what you just said. I remember being on the phone with him for the first time and thinking, wow, that is such a Midwestern man, you know? The accent, the way he speaks, it is so American. You know, it felt so home to me. And so seeing him in the Netherlands, it definitely is a culture shock. You know, he talked about the currency is different. The bills are different sizes, you know. It's the little everyday things that I think can be very overwhelming. You know, the street signs aren't in the same language. Your menu at the restaurants aren't in the same language. You have to Google Translate pretty much everything, which is incredibly frustrating, and I think it really can just wear you down after so long.
Well, it sounds like Owen is certainly keeping himself busy to the extent that it's possible. And he talked with you about how he is trying to acclimate to this new living situation.
What about that? Actually, I just went this morning to the Salvation Army to volunteer some time to get me out of the house. You know, like I said, I'm waiting on so I can get some therapy going on. But I don't see like a community like I would have in Colombia. What I built in Colombia, which actually shocked me because through my detention, I found out, you know, how loved I was and how many supporters I had behind me, you know. But working in the music industry and just having a heart, helping people out, I always tell people I'm one phone call away and just to contact me if needed. And I'm a man of my word.
So it clearly sounds like Owen is missing his home and his community back in Colombia. Now, he can reapply to enter the U.S. in 8 to 10 years. Do you know whether he will do so?
So it is a question we definitely asked him, me and Cecilia Coparanian, the other journalist I did this interview with, and he said he just wasn't having his mind on that right now. He's trying to focus on, you know, taking one step at a time, getting to the next day, seeing his family again, trying to handle everything that's coming at him right now and staying positive in this moment. And then I think eventually closer to then, he'll sort of navigate that as well.
So his outlook on the future, you know, with his father in the Netherlands and then with his family back in Missouri, does it seem to be, I mean, considering the circumstances, does it seem to be relatively optimistic?
I think there's a big difference between optimistic and positive. I think he is trying to stay optimistic. He's trying to keep his head up and you know, push through the difficult moments, which are more consistent now, obviously, but it's hard to take away from, you know, the real loss that is here. But he really is staying positive. You know, we had a conversation about it, and he talked about the fact that he doesn't really see any point to being negative, to keeping your head down. You know, you have to keep your head up. You have to succeed, and that's what he's trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Addison, you're a student reporter and a producer at KBIA, and that is our sister station in Colombia. How did you become interested in or clued into this story?
I've been following this story since it started. I mean, I think it really is something different and something you don't see every day. I don't think Midwest people, especially in Columbia, you know, in Audrain County, Boone County, expect to see, you know, someone that close to home go through something like this. It feels like a big city thing that happens far away. So, I mean, it really took Columbia by storm when it first started happening. And then eventually, after, you know, hearing about it and hearing he would eventually be unfortunately deported, I had talked to Stan Jastrzebski about my study abroad experience in Brussels, and he said that there might be an opportunity to speak with Owen while he's here.
Mm-hmm. And Stan is the news editor over there at KBIA?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, how does it feel for you to be in a position to tell part of this story at this juncture, not only in what is happening in the U.S., but you know, at this point in your journey as a young journalist?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's daunting to take on a story of this size, just because, you know, Cecilia and I both, we just want to do him justice and do his story justice. But I think the mantra that kind of got us through was just trying to make him feel a little bit more at home. You know, there are bigger outlets and different outlets who are reaching for this story as well, but what can Columbia, Missouri kids bring to this that, you know, might be a different perspective than, say, some of the other people reaching out? Mm-hmm. And trying to give that to him as well, make him feel like his community still does care about him and is still here for him.
And that perspective, what is that perspective, Addison?
I mean, I think a lot of it is sort of the shared culture shock. Obviously, we're in extremely different situations, but, you know, we got to laugh about how many swans there are in Europe for some reason. Mm-hmm. And, you know, talking about the differences in currency, talking about trying to read a menu that's in Dutch for some reason. And, you know, there were a lot of different things. Talking about home. We did talk about cornfields probably more than once. You know, they're the little things you miss from home that you don't realize you'll miss.
And what do you think will be the mental picture that you will carry away from your time speaking with Owen, who for many people, he's the subject of a news story, but he's someone that you actually were able to talk with one-to-one?
Yeah, I mean, I think my brain still goes to talking to him on the phone for the first time and being struck by how Midwestern he was. And then I met him in person, and, you know, he is very familiar in that way. And I think seeing him in this environment, driving down the street, pointing out bike lanes and different buildings and restaurants and things like that, you know, it very much felt like being dropped in another world.
Mm-hmm. And another world, I mean, the Netherlands is very far away. How did your going there come about?
So I am currently doing a study abroad program in Brussels, Belgium. And it was only about a 2-hour train ride from Brussels to Amsterdam. And so when we found out he would be here, that our time in Europe was going to overlap with his, I think it just felt natural to try to bring that to him as well and bring his story back home as much as possible.
Is there anything, Addison, that you'd like to add about your reporting on Owen Ramsingh?
Something that he talked about a lot that maybe just, you know, should be reiterated as much as possible is the importance of this story and trying to give it reach, and also his love for Columbia and the Columbia community. And I think, you know, he, whenever talking about it, was just so felt so supported by the people who did back him, and so proud of that space and that community. And I just think that that's such a beautiful thing, you know, and it's such a sad thing that he doesn't have that at the moment.
Addison Zanger is a student reporter and producer at KBIA, our sister station in Colombia. Addison, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
This episode was produced by Elaine Shaw and I, our executive producer, Alex Hoyer. Recorded by our audio engineer, Aaron Dorr. Edited by Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Hi, I'm Laura Hamden, and my colleague Jessica Rogan and I are your daily hosts of the Gateway newsletter. We meet with the editors in the STLPR newsroom every weekday to bring you the top local stories of the day in a quick and easy 6-minute read by 6 a.m. In an age of overwhelm, it's a refreshing, thoughtful take on the news day, if we do say so ourselves. Fine-tune your daily news habit with the Gateway newsletter. Subscribe at stlpr.org/gateway.